Every weekend for 2 years, my husband told me he was going fishing. Not a weekend here or there, not occasionally. Every single weekend from April through October, without fail, without variation, Dwayne packed his truck the night before. Tackle box, cooler, that old green vest he'd had since before I knew him, and he was gone before I finished my first cup of coffee. I never questioned it. I want you to understand that before I say anything else, because people always ask, "How did you not know?" And the honest answer is that I did know some things. I knew Dwayne loved the water. I knew he'd grown up fishing with his father on Lake Marion in South Carolina. I knew that even as a grown man, even as a husband, even as someone who worked 60 hours a week as a project manager for a construction firm, he needed that. Space. Quiet. Something that was just his. So I gave it to him. I was a high school vice principal. My weeks were not gentle. By Friday afternoon, I had handled everything from cafeteria brawls to parent complaints about reading lists to the particular kind of bureaucratic exhaustion that comes from sitting in 4 consecutive meetings where nothing gets decided. When Dwayne left Saturday mornings, I slept until 9. I made pancakes. I called my mother. I took walks by myself that didn't require me to be responsible for anyone. I thought we were good at being married. I thought we had figured out the hard part, the part where 2 people who love each other still need to be separate people. I was proud of us for that. I told my friend Brianna that the secret to a happy marriage was not needing to be attached at the hip, and I believed it when I said it. The thing about 2 years is that it becomes invisible. After enough Saturdays, I stopped noticing the pattern. The cooler going into the truck stopped registering as a thing that happened. It was just Dwayne being Dwayne, and I was just me. And we had a good life. A quiet house in Greenville, South Carolina, 2 paid-off cars, and a joint account that I checked every Monday morning because I handled our finances. That was the first thing that didn't add up. I noticed it in March, before fishing season technically started. A charge on the debit card for $340 at a place called Sunrise Marina, which I recognized. Dwayne had bought gear there before. But this was a Thursday. A Thursday in March, and Dwayne had been at a job site in Spartanburg that day. He'd texted me at noon asking if we needed anything from the grocery store on his way home. I almost said something that evening. I had the bank app open on my phone and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and Dwayne came in smelling like sawdust and concrete, and he looked tired in the good way, the way that meant he'd actually worked, and I thought, it's probably nothing. Pre-season gear. Maybe he ordered something for pickup. I closed the app. I tell you this because I need you to understand how completely ordinary everything looked. There was nothing cinematic about the moment I should have paid attention. It was a Thursday evening in a kitchen that smelled like the chicken I'd put in the slow cooker, and my husband looked like my husband, and I chose to believe that. By May, I had found 3 more charges I couldn't account for. Not huge amounts. A $78 charge at a restaurant I didn't recognize in Anderson, South Carolina. A $120 charge at a hotel that I initially thought might be work-related, and another marina charge, this one for $100. I wrote them down in the Notes app on my phone, not because I was building a case. Because I am the kind of person who writes things down when they bother me, and these bothered me in a low, humming way that I hadn't figured out yet. I asked Dwayne about the restaurant charge. I kept it easy, kept it casual, just mentioned it while we were watching television. He said it was a lunch with a guy from a subcontracting firm that they'd met in Anderson because it was halfway for both of them. He said he forgot to tell me because it was boring work stuff. That was a reasonable answer. That was the kind of answer that a reasonable person gives, and I was a reasonable person who had a reasonable husband, and so I accepted it. I deleted that note. I kept the others. June came. Dwayne started his Saturday trips again. And I went back to my pancakes and my walks and my calls with my mother, and I told myself that the charges in March and May were nothing, because I needed them to be nothing, because the alternative was something I did not want to sit with. Here is something I have learned about myself. I am very good at not sitting with things. It was Brianna who made me stop. Brianna has known me since we were both 23 and working as first-year teachers at the same middle school, and she has a way of saying things without saying them. She came over on a Saturday in late June. Dwayne was gone, obviously, and we were sitting on my back porch with iced tea, and she asked me how things were going with Dwayne. Not in a worried way. Just the way you ask a friend, and I said, "Fine, really good, we're good." And she said she was glad. And then she said, "I thought I saw his truck parked outside the Riverside Grill on Pelham Road a few weeks ago, on a Saturday. Isn't that weird?" I figured I must have been wrong about the truck. I said yes, she was probably wrong about the truck. I poured more iced tea. I asked her how her sister was doing. We talked for another hour and a half. After she left, I sat on that porch by myself for a long time. Riverside Grill on Pelham Road is 12 miles from Lake Marion. In the wrong direction. There are no marinas near Pelham Road. There is no reason for a man going fishing to be parked outside a restaurant on Pelham Road on a Saturday morning. I got in my car. I'm not going to tell you I had a plan, because I didn't. I had Brianna's voice in my head saying, I figured I must have been wrong, and I had those notes in my phone, and I had the slow, particular feeling of something I'd been avoiding suddenly being unavoidable. I drove to Pelham Road. I don't know what I expected to find. I think I expected to find nothing. I think that's what you always expect. His truck was in the parking lot. I drove past once, then parked down the street and sat there. I'm a vice principal. I am trained to not react before I have information. I sat in my car for 7 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, before I got out and walked to where I could see the entrance of the restaurant. They were at a table by the window. I could see them clearly. Dwayne in a gray shirt I had washed and folded and put in his drawer, and a woman I did not immediately recognize. Maybe mid-30s, braids pulled up, a yellow dress, and his hand was on her arm across the table and they were both laughing. I took my phone out and I took photos. I don't know why that was my first instinct, it just was. Evidence. I am someone who collects evidence before I act. Then I looked at her face more carefully. I knew her. Not well. But I knew her. Her name was Petra. I recognized the braids. The way she held herself. She was the younger sister of a woman named Kevin, who I had been on a school board committee with 2 years earlier. I had met Petra exactly once, at a school board fundraiser, where she had shaken my hand and told me I seemed like someone who got things done. Dwayne had been at that fundraiser. He had met her the same night I did. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I did not confront him that night when he came home smelling like nothing, no lake, no fish, no outdoors, just a man who had showered before coming home. I made dinner. I asked about his day. He said it was good, the bass weren't biting, he mostly just sat with his thoughts. I said that sounded peaceful. I went to bed before him and I lay in the dark and I thought very carefully about what I needed to do. Here is the thing I need to explain, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why didn't you confront him right then? Why did you wait? And I understand that impulse, I do. But I am a person who has watched enough situations fall apart because someone acted before they were ready, and I was not going to hand Dwayne a version of this where he could talk his way out of it. I did not have enough yet. Photos of a man and a woman at a restaurant could be explained away before I could blink. I needed more, so I waited. The following week I called the bank. Our bank, where we'd had our joint checking and savings accounts for 9 years, and I asked them to send me a detailed transaction history for the past 18 months. I said I was doing an audit for our taxes and needed the full record. The woman on the phone was helpful and thorough, and I thanked her, and when I hung up, I sat at my desk at work, and I pressed my hands flat on the surface, and I breathed. The statements arrived on Thursday. I looked through them that evening at the kitchen table while Dwayne was at his Thursday night basketball league. I had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I went through 18 months of transactions line by line. What I found was $6,200, not taken in one lump sum, not obviously stolen, pulled out in pieces over 18 months. Cash withdrawals ranging from $80 to $400, a scattering of charges at restaurants and a hotel in Greenville I didn't recognize, and 2 sets of charges at a spa in Asheville that I had never been to. Gift shop charges, what looked like a concert ticket purchase. Flowers. There was a charge I recognized as a florist we had never used together. I had not bought flowers from that florist. I sat with that legal pad for a long time. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't feel like grief at first. It feels like your body deciding to be very calm while your mind does something very loud and private. I didn't cry that night. I just looked at the numbers, and I thought about 9 years, and I thought about the slow cooker and the pancakes and the Saturday mornings I had given him so freely because I trusted him with them. Then I thought about what I was going to do. I called my Aunt Harriet the next morning. My Aunt Harriet is 71 years old, and she worked as a paralegal for 26 years, and she is the most practical woman I have ever known. I sat in my car in the school parking lot, and I told her everything, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which is something she only does when she is taking something seriously. When I finished, she said, "Okay, here's what you do." She told me to contact a family law attorney before I said a word to Dwayne. She said South Carolina is not a community property state, but that my documentation of the financial withdrawals would matter. She told me to make copies of everything. The bank statements, the photos I'd taken, everything I'd written down, and to keep them somewhere outside the house. She said, "Don't change anything yet. Don't tip him off. Let him think you don't know." I said, "How do I do that?" She said, "You've been doing it for 2 years without knowing you were." She was right. That was the hardest thing she said to me. She was completely right. I made an appointment with a family law attorney named Sandra Okafor, who came recommended by a colleague whose divorce I had watched her navigate 3 years earlier with remarkable steadiness. I met Sandra on a Tuesday afternoon, and I brought everything. The bank statements with my notations on the legal pad, the screenshots of the photos I had transferred to a cloud backup, the notes I'd started keeping in March. Sandra was professional and careful, and she told me what I could reasonably expect in a divorce proceeding, given our assets, our length of marriage, and the documentation I had. South Carolina allows for fault-based divorce on the grounds of adultery, and she told me the documentations strengthened my position. She also said that the financial withdrawals, while not enormous, formed a pattern that would be relevant to the proceedings. I walked out of her office and sat in my car, and for the first time in 3 weeks I actually cried. Not because I was devastated. I mean, I was. But I cried because I had done the thing. I had walked into that office and said the words and made it real, and there was something about making it real that finally let me feel it. I gave myself exactly 1 week. I told no one else except Brianna, who I called that same Tuesday evening, and who did not say I told you so, which is one of the many reasons she has been my best friend for 15 years. She just asked what I needed. I said I needed someone to come over on Sunday. She said she would be there. I had decided that Sunday was the day. Dwayne came home Saturday from another fishing trip that wasn't a fishing trip, and I watched him carry that green vest in from the truck and hang it on the hook by the garage door, and I thought, That vest has never seen a lake this summer. Sunday morning, I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. Dwayne came downstairs in his weekend clothes and poured himself a cup and sat across from me, and for a moment it looked exactly like 1,000 other Sunday mornings, and I felt the weight of that. Then I put the folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder. Inside were printed copies of the bank statements with the charges highlighted in yellow, the photos I had printed at the drugstore, and a 1-page handwritten summary of the timeline I had reconstructed. I slid it across the table to him. I said, "I need you to look at that." He looked at me first, the way people do when they know something is happening and they're trying to calculate whether they can stop it. Then he looked down. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's not what you think." I said, "What do I think?" He said her name. He said Petra's name like it was something he'd been keeping in his chest and it fell out of him. And then he said they'd been seeing each other for almost 2 years, and that it hadn't meant anything at first, and that it had gotten complicated. I said, "The money." He looked up. I said, "Tell me about the money." He said he'd used some of the household funds, that he knew it was wrong, that he was going to pay it back. He said he was sorry. He said he had been trying to figure out how to end it, that he was confused, that the marriage had felt different, and he didn't know how to talk to me about it. I want to be honest about what happened in me when he said that. I felt something that was not sadness exactly. It was more like clarity, like a window being cleaned. Because standing there listening to him explain how our marriage had felt different, how he hadn't known how to talk to me, I realized that I had spent 9 years being a good wife to someone who, when he had a problem, decided that the solution was to disappear on Saturdays and take $6, $200, and give it to someone else. And he was now explaining this to me like it was a shared failing. I said, "I spoke with an attorney last Tuesday. Her name is Sandra Okafor. You'll be hearing from her." He stared at me. I said, "I'd like you to stay somewhere else for a while. I'll have Brianna here within the hour." He said my name. He said it the way he used to say it when we were 29 and first living together, like it meant something specific and good, and I felt that in a way I hadn't expected to, like a small clean cut. I said, "I know." And I meant it. I knew. I knew we'd had good years. I knew not everything had been a lie. I also knew that none of that changed what was in that folder. He packed a bag. He took his truck. The green vest stayed on the hook by the garage door, and I didn't touch it for 3 days because I didn't know what to do with it. And there is only so much you can handle at once. Brianna arrived 40 minutes later. She brought coffee and the kind of pastries you bring when you know someone is grieving something complicated. She sat on my couch and let me talk and didn't offer opinions unless I asked for them. I asked her once, later that evening, whether she had suspected. Whether that comment about the truck, the one she'd made on my back porch in June, had been a test or a hint. She said she genuinely hadn't been sure. She said she'd seen the truck and thought about saying nothing, and then decided that she would rather say something small and wrong than say nothing and be right. She said she'd been hoping I would tell her. She was imagining things. I said, "I know." We ordered delivery and watched a movie we'd both seen before, and she slept on the pull-out couch because neither of us felt like being alone that evening, which is one of the things I am most grateful for when I think back on that whole month. The divorce took 8 months. Sandra was methodical and clear-headed and walked me through every step. The financial documentation I had gathered worked in my favor. We settled without going to trial, and I won't say the terms were everything I wanted, because divorce is not a situation where anyone gets everything they want. But I came out of it with the house which I had contributed more to, and a settlement that acknowledged the withdrawn funds. Dwayne kept his truck and his tools and the fishing gear he had apparently not been using. He and Petra were together for about 4 months after everything came out, from what I heard through people we mutually knew, and then they weren't. I don't know what happened, and I stopped needing to know somewhere around month 6. What I know now is that I spent 2 years being very careful not to see something, and when I finally let myself see it, I was more prepared than I realized. All those Monday mornings, checking the accounts. All those years of paying attention to the details of our life, I had built the tools to dismantle the thing without knowing I would need them. I got the green vest off the hook eventually. I drove it to a donation box at the Goodwill on Augusta Road. I put it in and I drove home, and I didn't feel anything in particular, which I think meant I was getting better. My mother asked me, about a year later, whether I was angry. I thought about it. I said not anymore. I said I had been angry for a good while, a deep and useful anger that had made me very efficient, and then it had faded the way strong things fade when you've finished needing them. She said she was proud of me. I told her I was proud of myself too, not for surviving, that part I never doubted, but for not acting before I was ready, for doing it right, even when doing it right was the slower and harder thing, for being the person who goes home and makes dinner and waits and thinks and plans, because that person is the one who walks out of the attorney's office knowing exactly where she stands. The Saturday mornings are mine now, all of them. I sleep until 9. I make pancakes. I take long walks in a neighborhood that belongs entirely to me. I don't miss the quiet. I finally understand that it was never quiet. It just looked that way from where I was standing.